Here we go. This is one that Corey has asked me to watch on Straden because it is this is something that is something that's like close with his family. Oh, don't worry about Eki. That's okay for the Simons. So this is something Corey asked me to watch because it involves like his family history, and he was very interested in me watching this on screen. It's your 4 times great grandfather. So Corey, we are gonna watch a chat. We're gonna watch this. Is the history about the outlaw Lewis Redmond. And this is apparently Corey's 4 times great grandfather. So we have a famous person. We have someone in chat who is related to a famous outlaw. Explains a lot, doesn't it? So let's take a look at this and let's see. Get up to at least 420p.
The history itself is a product of the times in which it was written. And so it lacks veracity, or it lacks truth.
If you put 5 of the best reporters in the country on any scene, you're going to read 5 very different stories.
That's true. That's very true.
If we knew about Lewis Redmond in Western North Carolina, it has been forgotten. But he is vividly alive in South Carolina, particularly around Oconee and Walhalla. They still tell stories about him. Of course, like all folk heroes, half of them aren't true. Fabulous stories of things that he did. But the truth is strange enough, believe me.
He was a folk hero like no other in our part of the country.
Lewis Redmond was a name I did not know until I was around 20, 21 years old. And I grew up in this area, took South Carolina history, and should have known the name. And an uncle happened to mention him, and I started asking him details, and then realized that Lewis Redmond is my great-great-grandfather. I eventually found out about half
Wait. Corey, do you know this man?
Great-grandfather.
Do you know this man, Corey? Because he is... Is that who this is? His name is Mike Keaton? I missed it. I missed his name. Oh, yes. His grandparents are buried right next to Lewis. Oh, are you related to Mike Keaton at all? Because he said that he's his great-great-great-grandfather, so he's his 3 times great-grandfather. I don't know. Maybe this man was a player and had a lot more kids than you realized.
I eventually found out
possible.
Half of what I had originally found out was true.
Evening, folks. I am Lewis Redmond, murderer, bootlegger, thief.
Yeah.
At least those are charges against me. I'd never heard of Lewis Redmond, honestly, and I never realized that he was such a famous outlaw as he was at that time. But I think a lot of the old tales and the stuff after the Civil War that didn't just get passed on by word of mouth, it's untelling at the characters that we have lost and won't ever know anything about, like Lewis Redmond.
He was very much a product of his time and place. This was at the end of Reconstruction, when the South had nothing and the people up in the mountain South had even less. They had lost so many of their
A little bit,
men
Robespard.
in
A
the
little
war.
bit like Nick
Men
Cage.
from 12 years old to 80, you know, practically everybody that could make a living was dead or crippled. And they started out with nothing to begin with.
The worst thing about the Civil War wasn't the war itself, as far as the mountains was concerned. It was the Reconstruction period afterwards. People would just load up in the night and leave a farm that had been in the family for years and go to town and work in the textile plant. Speculators moved in and started buying up the land, and in a time when many people said bootleg or perish, they made moonshine.
It was just an absolute necessity for survival.
Yeah.
They had a saying back then, here's the old corn liquor, whitens the teeth, perfumes the breath, and makes childbirth a pleasure.
So it was a different time. It's hard to judge what that fella thought he had to do in those years to feed those children. People needed that money, and they needed to
So
buy
he was a
groceries,
moonshiner.
They needed to buy,
Nice.
need to pay their taxes.
Lewis.
So, Corey, are you going to start moonshining? You going to start making your own moonshine? Hmm? Oh, well, that explains plenty, doesn't it? Yeah, Corey, I'm guessing your blood is probably about 180 proofs then.
Inadvertently became a force for good in that he provided poor mountain farmers with a way to pay their taxes. They could moonshine. If they'd make the liquor and pass it to him, he would sell it. And he had an awesome moonshine ring that ran up out of Oconee, up through Toxaway and over into Buncombe County and through Jackson, and then back down into North Georgia. And it was an awesome operation.
And when Lewis would go pay your property taxes so the carpetbaggers wouldn't get it, that made him a hero. And he did this kind of thing. Fed the widows, stuff like that, you know.
Wow.
They brought in guns and you know, they ran them down and they had gun battles. It was a very, very rough time because these
I mean, Aaron, I'd say a lot of people, if they look back through their family history, particularly in the South, I'd say a lot of people tracing back their family trees, if they did like a genealogy search, back, their 3 times great grandparents, I'll bet you dimes to dollars, the majority of those of you in chat that live in the South could probably trace your roots back to a moonshiner. I'll bet you. Because moonshining was so huge. Corey, you did. Hang on. You actually did already. I'm gonna pull that. I'll pull that up on screen. While. Hang on. I'm gonna pull that up on screen while this is playing. Give me a second. There we go. Yeah. Here we are. Okay. And now let me do this. So chat, this is the gravestone of Lewis Redmond. This is the actual gravestone. Corey took this picture. So what I'm going to do is while the video is playing, okay, hang on. I have to do some finagling here. Give me a sec. While this is playing, get this a nice good shrink down here. Come on, you quit fucking with me. There we go. All right. Plant this right here. So this is the gravestone of this is the gravestone of him. And I need to fix this because I accidentally did the wrong one. Whoopsie. Need to fix. There we go. So that's his gravestone there in the lower left corner.
Shiners, they felt that it was their inalienable right. It was their land and their corn and their product, and they just saw no reason why they should pay taxes on it. They never had paid taxes on it before.
I tend to go with the South Carolina people who perceive revenuers as the scum of the earth, because they were. Frequently, the government hired people, many instances, they were still in jail. People with criminal backgrounds, they thought that they would make good revenuers, and there's a certain logic in that.
Redmond himself had started working on his dad's still when he was a young age and transporting some whiskey, and like many people, there was a warrant out for him. The revenuers raided his home. His mother was ill in bed, and he said the fright killed her a couple of days later. They arrested his father. Redmond wasn't at home at the time.
And old man Redmond was so apparently mistreated in jail that he died. Lewis was left with the girls because the two older boys had both been killed in the Civil War that he had to provide for.
The one event that changed his life happened on a back road in the mountains.
One of Lewis's childhood friends that he had played with became a federal marshal.
Duckworth pulled a warrant out with
I mean, that's Reaver, you're absolutely right. I mean, this was way back when, and jail conditions were, particularly in the South, where they were still trying to, generally speaking, the South was seen as far poorer of states than the North, especially right after the Civil War. So everything, living conditions, working conditions, jail conditions, the whole thing. Yeah, let me rewind a little bit. Everything was very terrible conditions. And yeah, I believe that's probably why the death rates were so high back then. Is you could catch diseases so easily, and even minor injuries could be fatal because the conditions back then were so abysmal in the South.
Wasn't at home at the time.
And old man Redmond was so apparently mistreated in jail that he died. Lewis was left with the girls because the two older boys had both been killed in the Civil War that he had to provide for.
The one event that changed his life happened on a back road in the mountains.
One of Lewis's childhood friends that he had played with became a federal marshal.
Duckworth pulled a warrant out with somebody else's name on it.
He was bluffing, of course. He was trying his damnedest to get Redmond to submit to being arrested.
What?
And he was going to walk him down the road in front of the world with that gun to jail. And Lewis was not going.
So he just made a spur of the moment.
What? They had crooked-ass fucking cops? Well, I shouldn't be surprised that they had crooked cops back then. I mean, crooked cops have been in existence since cops have existed. So, but like, what the fuck? So he's an outlaw, but not really. That's the thing. He's an outlaw, but he's not really an outlaw. Fucking hell.
Decision of what to do, and shot him through the throat.
Damn!
On the throat. I seen his collar button vanished. Blood just wailed out.
So Redmond in that instant goes from typical mountain moonshiner to having killed a federal marshal.
Officers
ain't good.
who were sent to capture him had a very frustrating time because local farmers lied to them and protected Lewis.
One of Redmond's most famous escapades took place when he was eventually actually set up. Redmond and his partner friend Amos Ladd arrived at the cabin. Door bursts open, a posse of about 4 or 5 come in. He manages to escape and comes back and waits in ambush for them. As they come down with Amos still in custody, he shoots one of them, and in the mayhem, Amos escapes. So now Redmond is mad, not because they got the whiskey, but because they took his money and his horses. So he goes to the marshal's home, captures him. Marshal says, we deposited the money in a bank in Greenville. And Redmond says, well, let's go write a check. So he accompanies the marshal's wife on horseback. She writes a check, and he says after talking to her, they were in dire straits. You know, their kids were a little bit hungry, so I told them to keep some of the money.
He was
Interesting.
courting Adeline Ladd, the sister of his Confederate Amos Ladd, who was a teenager. They were both young. In the middle of all of this, a bunch of the detractors.
Now, bearing in mind chat and YouTube, when I post this, think of the time frame. An adult man courting a teenager during this period of time in history was common. It was not looked upon the way we look at it today, so please do not bonk me, YouTube. This is historical context. This is history. This is education. Please do not bonk me. And in that vein, what I was going to say, but I kept letting the video play, is that he has a situation where he was considered an outlaw. I would say a lot of people who are considered quote-unquote outlaws are probably in the very same situation, where they were not actually criminals. They were, in actuality, they were caught up in situations they had no control over, and were actually trying to do the right thing, but because other individuals took the circumstances out of their hands, they ended up becoming outlaws because of a corrupt system that said, oh, you know, it doesn't matter if you were trying to do the right thing, we're still gonna arrest you. Kind of sounds familiar like today, doesn't it, chat? Where people try and do the right thing, and they're vilified as the criminal. You know, we're kind of seeing, in modern time, we're starting to see a repeat of this history, where people actually trying to do right by their families, by their communities, are being vilified by the powers that be and the justice system, and are effectively kind of becoming outlaws for being effectively becoming hero outlaws. So I mean, we are seeing a significant repeating of history in the modern day in this vein because of how things are happening with the current justice system. And it's, again, those who do not view history are doomed to repeat it. We're seeing it in real time. And hello, Ripper, welcome to the stream.
Actors came to the lad's house.
They came up on the porch. One of them knocked on the door, and the rest of them were already armed. And when that man opened the door, they blew him away.
His mother grabbed him and
I need context. I miss context.
His Confederate Amos Ladd, who was a teenager. They were both young. In the middle of all of this, a bunch of the detractors came to the lad's house.
They came up on the porch. One of them knocked on the door, and the rest of them were already armed. And when that man opened the door, they blew him away.
His mother grabbed him and held him while he died, and they were saying, Redmond, we got you, we got you. Well, it wasn't Lewis, it was Amos.
There are even versions where it didn't happen in the house, it happened outside. The man was returning to the house and turned around in the doorway and they shot him. And finally, all we have is Redmond's version, Amos Ladd's mother and his sister's version, and as near as I can tell, the revenuers aren't talking. They did later. They had to testify in court, and they claimed that he drew first.
Of course.
Not only did he draw first, his gun misfired.
The jury was out for 35 minutes and came back not guilty, and that just added to the sense that there's nothing we can do. The law not only is persecuting us, but will not help us at all, which again led to more, we're going to have to do this outside, and who's leading the charge outside? Major Redmond. He became the people's champion.
Yeah. Again, we are seeing history repeating itself like this in real time. In real time, we are seeing history repeating itself like this. Because it's how many times have you heard in the news or even in your own personal lives people have told you very similar things is happening? A very similar circumstance is taking place where,
history is more prophecy than cautionary. So long as humans exist, history is doomed to repeat. Cheer 100.
And I've actually said that. I agree with that because I have said it. Because the concept of those who do not learn of history are doomed to repeat it is a misnomer. Because history will invariably repeat itself, no matter how cautionary you are. History will indeed repeat itself in one way or another. Maybe not all at once. Maybe it will be staggered over a great period of time. But there is no stopping history from repeating itself because stories will age and fade away, like this one. Probably many people are, I'd say, other than Corey having just found out about this, nobody probably knows about this story. And so these stories fade and disappear through time. And thus, any lessons that anybody could have gleaned from them are lost to the ages. And thus, we will repeat the history. There are many times where we have seen history repeat itself over and over and over again. And that is the fact. History is going to repeat itself. There is no stopping it. The only thing you can try and do is be prepared for when it does happen. Also true, Johnny-Most, that humans like patterns. We are pattern-based animals. Correct. Yeah, it's exactly, Corey. It's like you are probably the only one in chat that is familiar with this. But again, this kind of thing is we're seeing where,
Some of the most evil in history has studied and was inspired by the history. Cheer 100.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, hell, some of the most evil people in history today have disciples of their teachings. Think of the mustachioed bastard from the 1940s. He's still his quote unquote lessons are still being taught to this day. Reva, the one that basically that wanted to eliminate an entire people. That one. I'm not going to say the name. And Brel, thank you for the follow. Yes, I'm not going to say the name. You can figure it out. But those teachings still exist today. And unfortunately, we are, maybe not in our lifetimes. This may very well not be in our lifetimes. This may be 100 years from now. We are going to see an individual like that come onto the scene again and do the same goddamn thing as last time. It may not be on the same scale because, obviously with the increases in technology across the board, doing something like a world war is probably not quite as doable as it once was. There may be more subterfuge in it, but you are going to see an individual like that rise again. It is inevitable.
Like, for example, one of my great-grandfathers was a cavalryman in the Civil War. We still have his military papers along with his cavalry sword and musket. The land we live on was given to him in the land those who make by George Washington. Not necessarily the best.
Yeah, and Eki? Interesting. That's pretty cool that you have cavalry sword musket. I got a couple muskets too. And Bogget, you're right. There's an even better expression, which is history is written by the victors. Which could be the biggest impact, but
it's already happened. People just didn't care because of where it happened. Cheer 100.
Sadistic, I don't think they didn't care because of where it happened. I think if it's already happened, they didn't care because it did not have the worldwide consequences like it did back in the 1940s. That's the key. The 1940s, it was worldwide consequence. If it doesn't have that, we're not seeing as large of a scale of consequence as back then, and it may not be possible at present to affect such worldwide consequence. But the core tenet is going to be there in that one individual who rises up and basically forms essentially an army. It is going to happen. It may not happen in our lifetimes where we see it to that degree, but it will happen. And Robespierre, I mean, my muskets are non-functional. They are antiques. They are 100% non-functional. So that's why I had no problem bringing them into Canada when I relocated here. Yeah, Robespierre, but that's a group. I'm talking about an individual. I'm talking about an individual who basically advocates genocide and ends up getting so many people following them that they can create a literal army to try and take on the world.
Well, Appalachia has a history of being victimized by outside interests, and in every indication that I find, the government is always connected with it. The government endorsed what the timber people did, and then in came the mineral people and the coal mines, and so at the present time even, if you're dealing with a true native of the mountains, you will find that he is very suspicious of what he calls the outsider, the outlander. Sometimes they call them missionaries, and it has nothing to do with religion. It's people who come here to help us. And so
I'm from the government and I'm here to help. It was way before Reagan said it. That's for damn sure. And I'm sure most people know that. People were suspicious. People, as long as a government has been in place, people have been suspicious of it. Reagan was probably just the first person to publicly be able to put that quote out to the world, that now it's basically people have run with it. But suspicion of the government, that's always been a thing. Always.
It has bred a skepticism and an antagonism for outsiders, and the government in particular, because time and time again they've been victimized by forces beyond their control, and usually they were forces that had government sanction.
This tradition of the outlaw was ingrained with the Irish. That played into Redmond's ascendancy into folk hero status. Suddenly, Redmond becomes a national celebrity, on the run in the mountains, flaunting federal authority. Redmond was called the most notorious outlaw in America. To a lot of the Southern papers at the time, he was the quintessential Southerner who was fighting the Yankees, fighting federal power.
Yeah.
In the northern papers at the time, he was a scofflaw who was fighting federal power.
See, the New York paper.
Yeah. And how many times have we heard that? How many times have we seen that kind of division? Not, of course, not North and South.
No matter what,
but
a society, or anyone who is categorized as a leader, someone will have their gripes.
Oh yeah, of course. But with this, like, this was like the North and South papers. The North were calling him an outlaw, flouting, fighting the government, whereas the South were calling him a hero. Obviously, it's not North and South anymore to that degree, but how many? We're seeing the divisions now where you've got people that will express an opinion, where people will, support that, say, yeah, they're speaking truth to power, whereas you have the other side saying they're an ist or a phobe of some sort, or flip that route. And someone's like, someone is calling for tolerance and understanding with all peoples, and you've got the other side saying they're DEI or woke. We're seeing it from both angles. And it's just, we're seeing those divisions as starkly now as we are seeing post-Civil War, like immediate post-Civil War, which is, again, history repeating itself. That's why a lot of people are saying that America is on a precipice.
As a panel from Attack on Titan said, so long as humans have different beliefs, there will always be Concheer 100 flicked.
Very likely. Yeah, that's it's human nature. It's tribalism. Tribalism exists. It will continue to exist for as long as humanity exists. And as long as tribalism exists, there will always be conflict. There can be of varying degrees of escalation. But we're seeing it to such an extreme level nowadays. That's why so many people say that America is on the precipice, and not even just North America. Beyond North America, we're seeing it in North America, we're seeing it in the UK, we're seeing it in other European countries, on the precipice of a literal civil war. Because the divisions are so stark between realistically a relatively small few, but those relatively small few have such incredibly loud voices and are in positions of power or authority that we have no choice but to hear them. And these are voices that can actually change policy. So that, that's why everyone else that wants nothing to do with all the bullshit, the huge swath of middle ground that I always talk about, that huge swath of middle ground, nobody wants anything to do with it. They're like, will you please just shut the fuck up and let us live peaceful lives? Nobody hears that because the voices on either side are so loud and are in positions where they have a bullhorn and actually have power behind their words in terms of political power, money, entertainment, journalism, what have you. They have power that they at their disposal. The people in the middle has no choice but to hear it and be affected by it in various ways. It's why people of certain states, namely like California, where you've got these people with political power with these radical ideologies that are in power, making policy decisions, the people who want nothing to do with this shit, who are not involved in any way, have no choice but to live by those people's will. Hence why so many are leaving the state, and other states for that matter. And again, this is what is driving the country towards the Civil War. Because the huge swath of middle ground, the quiet voices that are basically saying, shut the fuck up, are being ignored. And very soon, people are not going to allow themselves to be ignored anymore. Pretty soon, people are going to get pushed to a point that ignoring them is not going to be an option. And when that happens, that's when things are going to pop off. And personally, I don't want to be anywhere near that when it happens, because it's going to be a shitstorm. And the bigoted birthday clown. Thank you for the follow. Please don't be bigoted.
Would describe him as malevolent, leering, bestial, walked with a slump and leered.
Now let me see if I can't put that all together.
And you turn around and read a description of him in, say, Arthur's History, and he is dark, raven black hair, strikingly handsome, walks and moves like a panther. Remarkable difference.
You have various accounts
Exactly,
of him,
Geronimo's.
from the northern papers, the southern papers, and then you have the almost completely fictitious dime novels that were written about him. In one in particular,
Oh my, romancing the ladies. Look at this. Thank you, Donuts. Look at how he looks here. Holy crap, they made him look almost feminine. Like, look at that facial structure. It's more feminine than the woman in this artist rendering. The facial structure and the hair. He looks more feminine than the woman. That's kind of funny. Although back then, these kind of features were attractive on a man. Back for this time period, this was viewed as being aristocratic and thus attractive. So, but I just find it funny that he looks more like a woman than the woman.
he was described as having long flowing golden curls and wore the bandoliers and, a double brace of pistols and was rescuing fair maidens. He had
Let me see that again.
and, a double brace of pistols and was rescuing fair maidens.
No. Leave them alone. Please.
Had attended Princeton and spent time in Europe. You have essentially popular opinion trying to put its stamp of how...
Well, again, Bobcat, back then, during that time period, the feminine features were viewed as being aristocratic. So, that is what women wanted back then. Back during the 1800s, that's what women wanted because of what it represented. Status meant more back then versus actually, at least in that part of society. Status meant more than actually falling in love with someone. Status was just a means for you to increase your own personal status. And fair, effeminate men were viewed as aristocratic, and thus a means for a woman to elevate her own status. Now, in the modern day, where that doesn't work anymore, where there is no quote-unquote aristocracy, God, I'm losing my words, aristocracy. Because there's no aristocracy now, the view of effeminate men is not as attractive. What changed is the status quo, is that men and women were no longer had to be born into a family to achieve wealth. At least not exclusively. That was not an exclusive need, where you had to be born into a wealthy or aristocratic family in order to achieve an aristocracy or wealth. So the playing field got leveled in that respect, where the non-aristocratic individuals, through work, through intelligence, through actions and deeds, could rise to levels of wealth and power without that family history basically supporting. That's what changed. the playing field got leveled out. And it still is to this day, although admittedly nepotism is still playing a very, very strong role in a lot of when it comes to wealth and power. Undeniably, that absolutely is still there. But the average person does have the ability to attain the same level. It's insanely, it can be incredibly difficult, but it can be done, unlike back then when you pretty much needed a family lineage to achieve that level of wealth and power. And Ryga, thank you for switching over to the tier 1. Thank you.
It wants to see him. And at the heart, you have this mountain farmer who I think would rather be left alone.
No, Sadistic and Ralph, I don't. This anime cat girl does not want a Porsche. This anime cat girl is perfectly happy with a normal life, without riches. I'm comfortable, yes. I certainly have no objection to being comfortable, but I don't need a lot of rich crap. I have no need to accessorize my home. You want a Porsche? Well, God bless it. Okay, Taurus, well, be careful. Oh, okay, Sadistic. I gotcha. You were kind of speaking like of the braid-rotted TikTok girls. And, Derek, thank you for the follow. Thank you.
I found a lot of references in South Carolina newspapers that the notorious outlaw Redmond has retreated to North.
Aaron, I'm gonna tell you something. There are girls out there with my mindset. There are. They're hard to find. I won't say they're not. They're out there. There's plenty of them out there. You just have to try and find them. It's tough in this day and age. They're out there, though. They are.
Newspapers that the notorious outlaw.
My girl loves my smart ass mouth and my tattoo cheer 100.
Oh, that's plenty. There are plenty of girls out there that are seriously into tattoos and like a good smart mouth. And on occasion, a constant smart mouth. Nah, but sometimes, yeah.
Redmond has retreated to North Carolina and is somewhere in Jackson County. And it's interesting that Jackson County retains no memory of him at all. And of course, then I met Opal, which made no sense at all. I was in a grocery store. Opal came up and said, "Are you the feller that has been writing about the outlaw?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Well, I think I'm related to him." And I says, "No kidding." She said, "I think so. We was raised to not talk about it, but I think that we was." And I said, "Well, ma'am, if you don't mind telling me, do you have any idea where he lived?" I never have been able to figure out where he lived. She says, "Well, of course I know where he lived. He lived at the King place. Silver Watershed's up there, and that's where John King lived." And then she looked at me and said, "Who's a relative of yours?" One of the Kings married Lewis Redmond's sister.
Well, yeah, Corey, like you said, I mean, when the standard back then was to have 8 to 10 children, it's one big, I'm not going to say incest, but it's like everybody's related to fucking everybody in these kind of areas because they have so many fucking kids. You have no choice but to be related to everybody in there.
Maddie, and he come to live up there.
Well, Maddie Redmond was my great grandma. She married a king. I read his story and he said he couldn't find where he stayed at. And I saw him at Walmart one day and I told him I knew where he stayed.
You go up Fisher Creek or Dill's Cove?
You go up Fisher Creek and then you turn to your left up there. It's where the Dill's water starts up Dill's head of that mountain up there.
All right.
Okay, chat, I'm going to say this. listening to people with really thick Southern accents like this, it kind of reminds me when I first got to Newfoundland. When I first went to Newfoundland and listening to Newfoundlanders who are down the bay and not like in the cities, who are like rural Newfoundlanders, listening to them talk, I swear to God, I could only understand 1 out of maybe every 5 words. Like the Newfoundlanders with really thick accents, I could understand about 1 in every 5 words. It was insane. It was like hearing a foreign language. It is crazy.
Here we are driving on a paved road into a section that, my God, there wasn't even a trail, a dirt trail or nothing. This was pure.
Like I can understand everything these people are saying. Like even with the thick Southern accent, I can understand.
When you get into the research of somebody,
Have you, Corey?
keep searching for more and more, and it gets to be like wanting food or something else. You get into it and you don't want to quit.
Oh, there's the water system. I'll be damned. See, over there's the big wheel. Lewis Redmond, the outlaw that I've been writing about, lived here. And to him, of course, it was paradise. It looked like an ideal place to make moonshine. And he apparently did so for several years. His sister Mattie had married a king, and they lived here in this section, which is about as remote as you can get.
Corey, you learn all sorts of stuff.
I figured it was time we went on the offensive. And we saddled up and we rode back into town, and on the way we run into that posse and we run.
I found in writing about Redmond that I did not create fictitious events in order to enrich or make Redmond more interesting. If anything, I had to muffle it down. I had to buffer it because the truth is so unbelievable, you would think I made it up.
Yeah, I think he was a whole lot meaner guy than we actually portray him being, because they said he hit out and shot a guy off a horse as he rode by, and we don't have any of that in the play. I think we kind of mellowed him up a little more than he really was.
He was giving hope to a lot of people that
well,
the law.
Not surprising. I mean, just in the deep
We
south.
hear that on TFE a lot.
Yeah, I mean, well, like in this particular case, in the deep south, especially if you're an outlaw, you kind of had to be mean. You really did. You kind of had to be mean in order to survive, because you always had to be ready for someone as mean or meaner to confront you. And it's not like this was a time of prosperity. This was far from a time of prosperity. So being mean was a survival tool. So it does not surprise me that he was probably a lot meaner and nastier than he's being presented like in that play, in that one-man play that the guy's doing. It makes total sense.
Law might not be on our side, but Redmond is fighting for us. And not fighting in Congress, he is actually fighting. He is shot and being shot at.
During all this, he sent out notices to everybody that he was getting married, and he and Adeline had this wedding, and then they disappeared. And they disappeared up the Little Tennessee River into North Carolina, into what's now the bottom of Fontana Lake. Well, one morning he was out hoeing his cornfield early, and here came the federal boys.
Several variations saying that he started firing immediately. Some say that the posse didn't even give him warning, that they just started shooting.
What?
Cheer 100, do I have to send you some of the newer TTBT videos?
TTBT? I don't know what that is, Bobcat. But chat, does anybody else think that this is sounding an awful like Red Dead? The first Red Dead Redemption? Or, not Red Redemption. Yeah, Red Dead Redemption. Yeah, Saudi and all those. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it sounded an awful lot like that ending to Red Dead, the first one. Hi, how to these? Mm-hmm. I kind of, well, I mean, I was gonna say, I wonder if Rocksteady or Rockstar would used the story for some part of Red Dead, but I'm guessing that Rockstar probably doesn't even know about this history because it's so unknown. But god damn does it sound very similar to at least the ending of it.
In the end, though, he was hit.
And according to whose account you believe, he was
True,
shot either
sadistic.
20 times or 50-something times.
They shot him 13 times.
I mean, to be shot 6 times as he was in Bryson City, and I think that's probably the accurate number. It got up to 14. Or, you know, there's even a version where his lungs were hanging out of his
I'm
chest.
watching some
They
history,
left him
Steve.
for dead out there lying between his cornrows. She heard the shooting and ran out there, and they retreated. They didn't even stay to take the body.
And they had already written his epitaph and even had his death words in the paper. You know, I'm sorry. Sorry. I regret my shameful life. Boom.
Oh. Wait. First outlaw killed, Redmond shot after defying the law for many years. A letter from the Swain County says the Redmond notorious outlaw was defied the United States authorities in South North Carolina for several years by persistent violation of the Internal Revenue Law was captured. They fucking shot him after being fatally wounded. Oh, for fuck's sake. I mean,
When he was reported to have died, the New York Times covered that front page. Several months later, when Billy the Kid died, that was a paragraph on page 8. Redmond probably made the biggest mistake a potential folk hero could make. As he is lying there bleeding from 13 wounds among the cornrows, he survived.
Jesse James is famous. There's been hundreds of books written about Jesse James. There's been movies written about Jesse James. People still argue and debate about Jesse James. Was he a vicious psychopath or was he a man trapped by history? Blah, 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 blah. They don't do that about Redmond. Why? He did not die the way a hero dies. If he had gone out in a blaze of glory, shot to death, if he had died that day in Bryson City when they shot him, we would still be talking about him.
If he had
And again, the fallacy of human nature. We don't appreciate our living heroes. We only appreciate the dead ones. And especially the ones that go out guns blazing. For whatever reason, human society for centuries has celebrated the hero dying in battle versus the one that gets wounded in battle and survives. Why this is, I don't know. This is a whole psychology issue. Maybe it's because the great sacrifice has more meaning to people versus not sacrificing your life and actually living. But we've seen this for centuries. For God's sake, look at what all the heroes that Nick talks about. We don't know about any of these publicly. They are not names that are common in the public mind because they didn't die in battle performing their great deeds. They survived. And so because of that, we don't know them. If it were not for people like Nick or the person who made this video, we would never know about these individuals and the things that they did. And that's sad. That's really sad because we shouldn't only take note of the people who died doing doing the right thing, we also need to take note of the people who survived or who lived doing the right thing. Because their deeds are no less heroic or noble because they survived. Whether they lived or died does not detract from their actions. And it shouldn't. And for anybody that thinks that it does, fuck you. Vehemently fuck you. Someone should not have to die for you to take for you to take note of their good deeds. I mean, there's not really much more I can say about that. It's a fallacy of humanity. Well, and I mean, Aaron, like, I don't do that. I know many do. I don't like to kill off heroic characters. I don't like doing that thing of like, oh, the character dies heroically. No, I don't like to do that. Because number one, it's tripe. It's done so fucking much it's become tripe. And there's no reason why the hero has to die. Honestly, it's become expected now that the hero dies. It's become expected, and I don't like doing it. It's why I haven't done it. And I haven't, and I don't know if I'm going to. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. A hero that doesn't die, that they manage to claw their way back from death, definitely hits harder than the one who dies. Because the hero that is able to claw their way back from death, imagine the level of fortitude that person must have to be at death's door and say, fuck that shit, and crawl their way back to life. That takes a hell of a lot of fortitude that is never really given the proper respect that it deserves. Yeah, the hero getting the girl and riding off into the sunset has been put by the wayside, and it does need to come back. Corey, go for it. Fucking go for it. If it's something you feel passionate about, absolutely do it. 100%. I would encourage you to do it.
Died in that cornfield. He would have outshined Billy the Kid today.
He was near death for a while, but they nursed him back to health and eventually put him on trial. And he was sentenced to a total of 10 years in prison and $2,600 in fines. Then Senator Wade Hampton of South Carolina, who had been governor before, is pushing for a pardon. South Carolina governor at the time is pushing for a pardon. The Women's Christian Temperance Union was pushing for a pardon. After 21 months or so, he was transferred to the state penitentiary in South Carolina, spent just a couple of days there because a presidential pardon from Chester A. Arthur came through. And I always tell my students when I start talking about Chester Arthur that he's my favorite president, because if he hadn't pardoned my great-great-grandfather, I might not be here today.
This is the pardon that Chester Arthur, then the president,
very correct,
gave
Atanashi.
to Lewis Redmond to get him out of the federal pen in
Have you, Corey?
Auburn, New York. This is so beautiful. This is beautiful. I could not imagine anything like this.
Really? You had this in your family for a while? That is awesome. Where is it currently? Is it like in a museum? Like a local museum? Because that's why I imagine it's probably in a public space, like a small local museum where people can go and view it. But that's fucking cool. Okay, I see why you wanted me to watch this. Like, your connection to this is incredible. Oh, okay. Okay.
It's happening today.
I think Wade Hampton admired Lewis Redmond. And I think that he admired bootleggers or moonshine people who
Hello,
saved their
Hoseki.
lands and persisted by practicing what was an illegal act the federal government said was against the law. He represented an aspect of South Carolina history that did not fare well if you tried to defend it nationally or to the federal government. But he knew this man deserved a pardon.
Let's see. Famous criminal set free, Columbia, South Carolina. I've been to Columbia, South Carolina, actually. I have been there. Lewis Redmond, the famous moonshiner, whose deeds of blood have been chronicled throughout the length and breadth of the land, has arrived at his home in the upper third of the state, once more a free man by the magnanimity of the government, and is again surrounded by his family and the endearments of home. His violations of state and national laws are written in the criminal history of the country. Okay, Corey, you let me know.
It was reported that Wade Hampton, the governor, and many well-wishers and admirers met him at the train station. Every time the train would stop somewhere along the way, people would get on just to shake his hand.
There was this huge entourage of officials down there, state politicians and everybody, to greet him and deliver him into the arms of Adeline and the children.
The next unusual thing that happened after he's been on the run from the government, nationally on outlaw, prison, federal pardon, was that there was a government distillery in Walhalla, South Carolina. The foreman contacts Redmond and said, would you like to come be the overseer of the government manufactured whiskey? And Redmond did.
He made gobs of money for the state of South Carolina or for Dietrich Beeman or whoever got the money, you know, by putting his picture on the bottles and the kegs and everything with whiskey. It was Lewis Redmond's, you know, prime product. So it thrived during that period where he lived happily till he died.
Yeah, so this is the tombstone that you have in down here. This is the tombstone. So he, what, 54 years old? 54 years old. I mean, for the time, for the 1800s into the very beginning of the 1900s, 54 years old is not a bad amount of time to live. Given the time period. He lived a pretty long life, honestly.
Died, he's still pretty young. He was in his 50s when he died in 1906.
Yeah, and being shot a ton. Yeah, and having about 8 plus holes put into him. Oh yeah.
He was many things to many people. He was an outlaw, he was a husband, he was a farmer, he was a moonshiner, he was a foreman of a whiskey distillery.
Okay, Corey.
But his family did have the last word. On his tombstone is engraved, he was the sunshine of our home. I think that may be a clear indication of who he was.
This one? The family portrait?
Where is that sexy cowgirl outfit, Ember? Wink, wink.
Ha ha. Okay, the little girl in the front. This one? Let me guess, your great-grandmother? Is this your great-grandmother, Gory? You grandmother? Wow, really? Holy cow. Wow. Corey, you're the great-great-great-great-great-grandson of a moonshiner. A famous one. We have a celebrity in our midst, chat.
Was.
it.
Cheer 100. I would rather see Ember in an elite flight suit.
The Bobcat, elite flight suits aren't very sexy. Although an anime-inspired version of it could be. A little tighter. Yeah, but they're bulky, baby Jeebus. They're... That was great. Yeah, Corey, that was awesome. That was very interesting. That was really very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Like, that was really cool.